I could still smell the garlic and ginger on my fingertips, even after scrubbing them twice. The clatter of the Lotus Gardens kitchen still echoed faintly in my ears, as though the sizzling woks and shouted Mandarin had followed me home. But inside our little two-bedroom on 43rd Avenue, everything was quiet, so quiet that even the hum of the refrigerator felt intrusive. I set my purse down on the worn kitchen table, the one with water rings from teacups we never bothered to wipe, and paused to listen. "Henry," I called out, not loud, but loud enough for him to hear from the living room if he was awake. No answer. I walked slowly down the hallway, my shoes making soft taps against the old wood floor, and peered into the living room. He was there, where he always was these days, curled under his favorite rust-colored throw, breathing light and shallow. His face was thinner now, more angular. The man I married 30 years ago had soft edges, laugh lines that crinkled with every joke, eyes that squinted in the sun, hands that were always warm. But now his hands were bone and parchment. Still, when he opened his eyes and smiled, I saw my Henry. "You're home," he whispered, like it took all the strength he had to say it. I knelt beside the couch, reaching for his hand. "I'm home. Want tea?" He shook his head. "Just sit." So I did. I tucked myself onto the ottoman, knees brushing against his. He looked at me for a long time, and I could feel something swelling behind those eyes. I had a feeling, one I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest for months now. But I waited, let him find the words. "Dr. Cho came today," he said. I nodded, waiting. He swallowed hard. "It's time, Grace." My lips pressed together. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. They said 6 months. Maybe less. I breathed in through my nose, sharp and cold, and blinked fast to hold back the tears. This wasn't new information. We'd heard the words stage for almost a year ago. But back then, the world hadn't started crumbling yet. Now I felt the cracks under our feet. He reached for my hand, gripping weakly. "I don't want to spend the rest of my days like this. On this couch. In this house. Waiting for the end." I searched his face. "What are you saying?" "I want to go somewhere. Just you and me. Like we used to." The idea made my heart catch. "Where?" "I don't care. Somewhere quiet. Maybe by the ocean. You remember that little cottage we passed near Astoria a few years ago?" I nodded. I remembered. "I want to be there. With you. I want us to laugh. To sit outside and drink bad coffee. To pretend, just for a little while, that we're not counting days." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. "Can you take time off?" he asked softly. "I'll make it work." I said it without hesitation. We sat in silence after that, fingers interlaced. The clock ticked above the mantel like it always did, and the furnace kicked on with its familiar wheeze. Life continued, even as ours shifted. That night, as he slept, I sat in the kitchen and wrote a resignation letter I hadn't planned to send. The Lotus Garden would survive without me. For 3 decades, I'd measured my days in shifts and recipes and kitchen burns. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the man in the next room who once danced with me in the rain just because a song we loved came on in a parking lot. What I didn't know then, what he hadn't yet told me, was that earlier that day, after Dr. Cho's visit, he'd called our lawyer. He'd signed the deed to the house over to me, made sure every legal thread was tied. He'd asked them to prepare one last will. He knew I wouldn't care about property or paperwork. I wasn't that kind of woman. But Henry was. Even in the face of death, he wanted to protect me. When he finally told me 2 days later, after we'd packed for our trip and sat on the porch drinking lukewarm coffee, I didn't cry. Not then. "I just needed to know you'd be safe," he said. "Even when I'm not here." I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered, "I already am. You made me safe a long time ago." And as we watched the wind stir the neighbor's wind chime and the sky tint orange with dusk, I understood that love, the real kind, doesn't vanish when the body fails. It lingers in every goodbye, every plan, every quiet act of care. Even as the end approached, we were still building something. Together. I didn't know how to pack for a trip that might be our last. I stood in the bedroom, a half-zipped suitcase on the bed, holding a sweater I wasn't sure Henry would even wear. It was his favorite, the soft navy one with a threadbare cuff, and for a moment I just stood there, clutching it like it might hold him together longer. He sat propped up in the armchair near the window, a blanket draped over his legs and a notepad resting in his lap. His skin looked paler in the morning light, but his eyes were steady. "Bring the ugly sun hat," he said, his voice thin but playful. I raised an eyebrow. "The one you said makes me look like a garden gnome?" "Exactly that one," he smiled. "You'll need it when we're out on the porch. I want you to look like yourself." I chuckled, folding the sweater neatly before placing it beside his medications. It felt surreal, organizing pill bottles next to beach towels, like we were planning for both ends of the spectrum, life and the end of it. "You're sure about Astoria?" I asked. He nodded, setting down his notepad. "It's quiet. No family. No city noise. Just you, me, and the ocean." I didn't need convincing. I'd already arranged a 6-week leave from the Lotus. Mr. Han understood before I even finished explaining. He just nodded and said, "Family first." He always said that. As I packed, Henry kept watching me. Not in a critical way, he never did, but like he was memorizing me. The curve of my shoulder, the way I rolled his socks in tight little pairs. It was the kind of gaze that comes when someone knows they don't have forever. Later that afternoon, before we left for the hospital to finalize his discharge papers, he stopped me at the door. "There's something I need to give you," he said. I turned, expecting maybe an old letter or one of his sketches. Henry always scribbled little floor plans and dreams for houses we'd never live in. But instead, he handed me a thick envelope. It was sealed, my name written in his looping script. "What's this?" "Something to ease your mind when I'm gone." My fingers trembled slightly as I took it. "Henry, I gave the originals to Elijah. This is just for you to keep." He leaned heavily on his cane as he sat back down, clearly winded. "It's the deed to the house, Grace. I transferred it to you last week." I froze, staring at him. "You did what?" I wanted no confusion. No court mess. No interference. His voice dimmed at the end, and I knew what he meant. His family. "But we could have done it together." "You didn't have to do it alone." "I did. You wouldn't have let me go through all that red tape if you thought it would wear me down. And it did. But it was worth it." I swallowed hard, pressing the envelope to my chest. "You didn't have to protect me from them." "Oh, but I did," he said, his gaze sharp now. "They'll come for it." "You know they will." I nodded. "I know." He let out a long breath. "That's why I need to ask you something. My last wish, Grace." I moved to his side, sitting on the arm of the chair. "Of course. Promise me, no matter how ugly it gets, you'll protect what we built. The house, our life, all of it." I leaned my head against his. "I promise." He relaxed into me then, that final tension easing out of his bones. And we sat there for a long while, just breathing, listening to the old radiator hum beneath the window. I don't remember what else we said. I only remember the feeling, like a handprint pressed deep into my back, anchoring me for the storm I didn't yet know was coming. That night, we left the city behind. I drove while he slept, his hand resting lightly on the center console, twitching now and then as though he were dreaming of sanding floors or measuring drapes. I caught myself glancing at him every few miles, committing his profile to memory. When we crossed the bridge into Astoria, the air changed. It smelled like salt and pine and wet earth. I rolled down the windows a little, letting the breeze sweep through the car. Henry stirred and looked out at the horizon. "We made it," he murmured. We did. The cottage sat just beyond a grove of cedar trees, small and old and perfect. The porch had peeling paint and a wind chime that sang off-key. There was no television. No reception. Only the sound of waves and the creak of branches. We unpacked slowly, like we weren't in a rush. Henry settled into the bedroom overlooking the sea, while I filled the fridge with simple things: eggs, bread, the miso soup he loved. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like we were dying. I felt like we were living, really living. And as the sun dipped low and cast everything in gold, Henry looked at me and said, "This is exactly where I wanted to be." I held his hand and smiled. Me too. The wind off the coast smelled like freedom, salty, clean, unburdened. As I stepped out onto the porch of the cottage, bundled in Henry's cardigan, I felt the weight of Portland slipping from my shoulders, piece by piece. No more hospital walls, no more pitiful glances from coworkers, no more checking the time between pain medications. Just silence, broken only by the rhythm of the ocean and the gulls overhead. Inside, Henry was resting, the morning sun gently warming his face through the bedroom window. I had pulled the faded curtains back so he could see the sea, and he'd smiled faintly when he opened his eyes. "Still here," he had whispered, and I smiled and said, "Still here with me." We'd only been at the cottage for 3 days, but already it felt like we'd lived a lifetime in its walls. The cottage was simple: 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, creaky floors, and a back door that stuck unless you kicked it just right. But to us, it was a fortress. A place to hide. A place where no one could reach us, not even his family. Henry's relatives had never accepted me, not really. For 30 years, I played the dutiful daughter-in-law, smiled through cold holidays and backhanded compliments. Estelle, his mother, once told me I had the hands of a dishwasher, not a wife. And that was on our wedding day. Wayne and Tasha, his brother and sister-in-law, were no better, always circling like vultures, waiting for a chance to pick over anything that might fall from Henry's table. They never visited when he got sick. Not once. Just a few hollow texts, no offers to help. But I knew, deep down, I knew, they'd show up when it was over. Which is why we left before that moment could be claimed by anyone but us. That evening, as I cooked dinner, a simple congee with scallions and ginger, Henry called me from the bedroom. His voice was weak, but clear. I wiped my hands on a towel and hurried to his side. "Come sit," he said. "Just for a while." I climbed onto the bed beside him, and he took my hand, tracing the lines of my palm with a shaking finger. "I dreamed about the restaurant last night," he said. "I was sitting at table 4, and you were in the kitchen, yelling at someone about overcooked rice." I laughed softly. "That sounds about right." He smiled, then turned serious. "Promise me something. Anything. When I go, keep talking to me. Every day. I don't care if it's nonsense. Just don't stop." Tears welled up behind my eyes. "I will." He closed his eyes for a moment, like the weight of those words had exhausted him. Then, with effort, he opened them again. "I don't want to die in a hospital, Grace. Not with strangers and beeping machines. I want this." He gestured weakly to the view. "The ocean, the golden sky. Promise me here." I squeezed his hand. "Here. Always here." Over the next week, he grew quieter, his body shrinking in on itself. But his spirit, God, it stayed. Every night, we'd sit by the fire, his head on my shoulder, and he'd tell me stories. About his childhood, about his dreams, about things he wished we'd done, but never had the time. I didn't cry in front of him. I saved those for the bathroom, the porch, the few stolen moments when I was alone and couldn't hold the flood back. And then one morning, I woke before dawn. The fire had burned low, and the cottage was quiet. Too quiet. I knew before I reached him. Henry's face was peaceful, like he had just drifted. His hand was cold in mine, but his expression held no pain, only stillness. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. Not at first. I just sat with him, brushing his hair back, whispering through the sobs that finally came. "I'm here," I kept saying. "I'm here, I'm here." By the time I called the coroner, the sky had begun to lighten. The birds were singing, and I could see the tide rolling in and out as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I dressed him gently in his favorite flannel shirt and the jeans he always wore when we worked in the garden. I placed a photograph of us from our anniversary in his shirt pocket, tucked his hand over it like a promise. When they took him, I stood on the porch and watched the van disappear down the dirt road. I didn't move for a long time. My legs felt rooted to the wood, my breath caught somewhere in my chest. That night, I opened a bottle of wine we'd saved for a special occasion. I poured a glass, set it beside his photo on the mantel, and whispered, "You made it special." And then, keeping my promise, I started talking to him. About the waves. About the soup I made. About how I didn't burn the rice for once. It was just the beginning. But I knew I would talk to him every day for the rest of my life. The day of the funeral came with cold wind and a gray sky, as if the weather itself understood that something irreplaceable had been taken from the world. I wore black, of course, not out of obligation, but because it matched how I felt inside. Hollow. Still. Heavy. The simple black dress had been worn once before to Henry's father's funeral, years ago, when Henry stood beside me and held my hand so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. Now it was just me. The service was held at St. Martin's Chapel, a small, white-paneled building nestled between two moss-covered oaks. Henry had always loved the simplicity of it. "It feels like a place where goodbyes can be honest," he once told me. I understood now what he meant. I arrived early, wanting a moment alone with him. His urn sat at the front of the chapel, polished and elegant, carved from dark walnut. He would have approved. I knelt before it and placed the last bouquet of lavender we picked from the garden near Astoria right beside it. My hand lingered on the wood. "You made it peaceful," I whispered. "You kept your promise. And I'll keep mine." I sat in the front row, tissue clutched in hand, as people began to file in. There weren't many. A few old neighbors, some from the Lotus, even Mr. Hahn came. Henry hadn't been one for crowds. But I knew who else would come, and I braced myself. The first to enter were Wayne and Tasha, dressed to impress in polished shoes and tailored black outfits that looked like they'd been chosen for a job interview, not a farewell. They gave me curt nods, no warmth in their eyes. Then came Estelle. Henry's mother walked in like she owned the chapel, like this was her stage. Her silver hair was immaculately pinned, her makeup thick. She wore her grief like a mask, too heavy, too dramatic. She didn't look at me as she passed. They all took seats in the row behind me, directly behind me, as though that gave them some claim to the space. I felt them settle in, a cold shadow pressing against my back. The minister began the service, reading Henry's favorite psalm, followed by a short reflection. I kept my eyes on the urn, refusing to glance behind me. But I could hear them, Estelle's whispered commentary, Wayne's restless shifting, Tasha's stifled sighs. It wasn't grief. It was impatience. When the minister invited me to speak, I stood, the only one who did. My hands trembled slightly as I approached the podium, but my voice held firm. Henry Daniels was not a perfect man, I began. But he was a good one. He was the kind of man who noticed small things, like how I liked my tea when I was tired, or which side of the bed I rolled to when I couldn't sleep. He never built empires or chased fortune. He built a life with me. I paused to steady my breath. In his final days, he asked me to promise two things: to speak to him every day and to protect what we built. I intend to do both. I stepped down before the emotion cracked through my voice, returning to my seat with a hand pressed to my heart. No one from Henry's family stood. Not Estelle. Not Wayne. Not even a word. It was telling. They came, but they didn't care to honor him. They were here for something else. After the service, I stood outside near the chapel steps as guests offered condolences. One by one, they hugged me, shared memories, spoke kindly. I thanked them, accepted their warmth like sunlight on frozen skin. And then Estelle approached. "My son deserved more than a seaside shack and a whisper of a service," she said, her eyes dry and hard. "We weren't even informed until after it was arranged." "I followed Henry's wishes," I said calmly. "This is what he wanted." She narrowed her eyes. "You always claimed to know what he wanted. But we were his blood." Wayne stepped in then, fake sympathy dripping from his tone. "You look tired, Grace. Maybe it's time you let the family handle things now." Tasha flanked his side, arms crossed. "He wouldn't want you doing this alone." I stared at the three of them, my heart pounding. Beneath my ribs, not from fear but fury. "I didn't do any of this alone," I said softly. "Henry was with me until the end. Every choice I made, he made with me. Estelle scoffed. We'll see what the law has to say about that. That's when it hit me. The way they looked at me. Not with grief. Not with loss. But calculation. Like sharks circling blood. I watched them walk away, murmuring to each other as if they were planning something. And I knew this wasn't over. But I also knew this. Henry had prepared me. And whatever storm they were conjuring, I was ready to meet it. Because love doesn't die with a body. And I was still holding on to him with every breath. The knock came at 9:07 in the morning. I remember because I had just set the kettle on and was standing at the kitchen window, watching the maple tree sway in the breeze, thinking how much Henry would have loved the way the leaves caught the sunlight that morning. I thought it might be the mailman or a neighbor dropping off a condolence card. People had been kind in that way. But when I opened the door, I felt a shift in the air, like a chill had crept through the threshold. There they stood, Estelle, Wayne, Tasha, and all 6 of their children, every one of them flanked by suitcases, duffel bags, even a plastic storage bin with a pink lid that looked like it had been grabbed in haste. Estelle was in her full makeup and pearls like she was arriving at some luxury inn. Wayne wore a smug little smirk. Tasha stood with her arms crossed and sunglasses perched on her head, even though the morning was cloudy. The children ranged from toddlers to teens, each looking more bored or annoyed than the last. "Good morning," Estelle said brightly, stepping forward as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "We've come home." My hand tightened on the edge of the door. "I beg your pardon?" Wayne stepped forward, holding a folded piece of paper. "This house belonged to Henry. As his family, we're here to reclaim it. We'll give you a few days to gather your things." My mouth opened, then closed again. I stared at him like he'd just spoken in another language. "You're joking." "No," Estelle said flatly. "We thought we'd be generous. But if you push us, we'll get the authorities involved." Tasha held up the folded paper as if it were some sacred text. "Henry left a handwritten will. It names Wayne as executor, and everything house, assets, is to be passed to us. You weren't legally married anymore, were you? No license in sight?" I blinked. "What in God's name are you talking about?" "Of course we were married." Estelle's lip curled. "Well, people do lie. You've always had a knack for embellishment." I stared at them all, the sea of smug faces and shifty eyes, and for a moment I said nothing. Not because I was stunned, no, I had seen this coming from miles away. Henry had seen it coming, too. That's why he transferred the deed before the cancer took his strength. That's why he made sure everything was in order. I thought of the notarized documents in my desk drawer, the envelope marked with his looping script, and the lawyer he'd insisted we hire just in case this exact circus showed up. But I didn't go running for papers. Not yet. Instead, I did something that must have startled them. I laughed. It started small, just a huff at first, then grew, the absurdity of the moment crashing over me like a wave. The children looked confused. Wayne frowned. Estelle's cheeks flushed with indignation. "You think you can just show up here with your matching luggage and some scrawled piece of paper and declare ownership like this is a game of Monopoly?" I said, wiping a tear from the corner of my eye. "I don't think so." Tasha's voice rose. "We have legal rights. Family has rights. Henry's wife has rights," I snapped, stepping out onto the porch now, face to face with them. "And I have every legal document to prove that this house is mine. He signed the deed over to me weeks before he passed. Notarized, witnessed, filed. So unless that paper you're waving is signed in front of God and 6 attorneys, I suggest you turn around." Wayne stepped closer, tone lowering. "This doesn't have to be a fight, Grace. We could come to an agreement. A settlement. You're living alone in a 3-bedroom house. It's hardly reasonable." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "What's unreasonable is thinking you can swoop in after a man's death to claim what you ignored during his life. Where were you when he was in pain? When he needed help getting out of bed? When I was changing sheets at 2 a.m. because the chemo made him sick again? You don't get to skip the suffering and collect the reward." Estelle scoffed. "So you're going to play the grieving widow card now?" I straightened, eyes meeting hers. "No. I'm going to play the legal owner card. The card Henry made sure I held." Behind me, the kettle began to whistle. I didn't move to turn it off. Now, I continued, voice calm but firm, you have 30 seconds to remove yourselves from my porch before I call the police. And next time you come back, bring a real lawyer. You're going to need one. They stared at me for a moment, stunned. Then, slowly, like a balloon deflating, Estelle turned on her heel. The children shuffled behind her, confused and quiet. Wayne crumpled the paper in his hand, jaw tight. Tasha glared at me like she'd been personally insulted. And just like that, they left. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Still, as I stepped back into the warmth of my kitchen, the kettle still singing, I felt something new settle over me. Not fear. Not anxiety. But readiness. They'd picked the wrong widow to mess with. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I sat at the kitchen table long after the tea went cold, a file folder laid open in front of me like armor. The deed. The will. The notarized signatures. Henry's handwriting. Proof that everything we built was real and protected. I ran my fingers over the paper edges as if the texture could reassure me, could keep me steady. I kept replaying the smug tilt of Estelle's chin, the way Tasha waved that ridiculous handwritten will, like it was a royal decree. They were arrogant. But worse, they were stupid. By sunrise, I had made my decision. They wanted a war, and I wasn't going to flinch. Henry didn't spend his final days securing our future just for me to bow to entitled parasites. I waited until mid-morning, then called them. I used my calmest voice, no tremble, no edge. Just enough of a smile so they couldn't detect what was coming. Would you all like to come by this afternoon? I asked smoothly. I think we should talk face to face. I'd rather resolve things before lawyers get involved. Predictably, they jumped at the invitation. By 3 o'clock, they were knocking again. Estelle wore a velvet blazer and a triumphant smirk. Wayne clutched his phony, will, in a plastic sleeve, and Tasha sauntered in like she already owned the place. Their children remained in the car this time, faces pressed to the windows, as if they were scoping out their new rooms. I led them to the living room where the sunlight still poured in through the big bay window, Henry's favorite reading spot. It felt poetic, really. I gestured for them to sit, and they did, spreading out across my couch like vultures nesting. Tasha cleared her throat. Let's keep this simple. We don't want a messy fight. If you vacate within the week, we'll consider letting you keep the car and a portion of the insurance. I nearly laughed. You're too generous. Wayne leaned forward, slapping the plastic sleeve against the coffee table. This is Henry's last will. He signed it weeks before he passed. He left the house to us. I looked at the paper, unimpressed. It was handwritten in blocky pen, barely legible, with no witness signature. No date, no notary. Just Henry's name at the bottom in a scrawl that didn't even match his usual writing. Tell me, I said slowly, did you force his hand with this? Or did you just copy his name and hope no one would notice how fake it looks? Estelle gasped. How dare you? How dare you, I replied, my voice sharpening. Coming into this house, my house, like squatters. Waving forged documents. Let me show you something real. I reached into the folder on the side table and removed the documents, thick, official, notarized with raised stamps that glinted in the sunlight. I took my time laying them on the coffee table. This, I said, tapping the top page, is the property deed, signed and notarized 3 weeks before Henry died. He transferred full ownership to me. Wayne snatched it up, scanning it with growing horror. No, this has to be forged. I'd be careful accusing people of forgery, I said, arching a brow. Especially when you're the ones carrying around a will written on printer paper and signed like a ransom note. Tasha grabbed the next document, reading it with narrowed eyes. A will? He made another one. Yes, I said coolly. A final will. Drafted by our attorney, signed in front of 2 witnesses and notarized. It names me as the sole heir to his estate. Not you. Not your children. Not the woman who called me a distraction for 3 decades. Estelle stood, color draining from her face. Henry would never do this. He was loyal to his family. He was loyal, I said, standing too, heart pounding but steady. To me. To our life. To the years we built together while you were too busy looking down your nose at me. He saw what was coming. He knew you'd pull something like this. That's why he took care of everything. Wayne fumbled for his words, blinking rapidly. We have rights. No, I said, staring him down. You have assumptions. And not a shred of legal ground. Tasha scoffed. You think you've won? I stepped closer. I didn't win. I protected. This isn't about victory. It's about honoring what he asked me to do. And you're not going to take that from me. They stood there, a chorus of disbelief and venom, stunned and hissing. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. The truth did all the work. When they left, the silence that followed was not the kind of silence that a house feels when it's empty. It was the kind of silence that says, you held the line. You did not let them in. I closed the door behind them and turned the lock. Then I walked to the mantel, where Henry's photo sat in its frame, and whispered, I kept my promise. And I would keep it again and again, every day they tried to challenge what was rightfully mine. I didn't want to call Elijah. Not because I didn't trust him, quite the opposite. Henry and I had chosen him together, long before things got bad. He was sharp, unshakable, and didn't flinch at the word family. But still, picking up the phone and dialing his number made everything feel official. Like the war Henry had tried so hard to prevent was now fully underway. But I did it. Because the time for hoping they'd go away had passed. Elijah Ford, he answered, brisk and alert. It's Grace, I said, pressing my palm to the center of my chest, where a dull ache had settled. They came, with a fake will. He didn't miss a beat. I'm on my way. He arrived less than an hour later, stepping through the door with the black briefcase and the calm confidence of someone who had prepared for this moment long before I ever thought we'd need it. He was younger than I'd expected when Henry first introduced us, barely 30, if that, but he had a gravity to him that made people listen. Henry had said, he reminds me of who I was before the world softened me. You'll like him. He was right. I poured coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table where the morning sun warmed the edge of the tablecloth. I slid the crumpled will across to him, still in its cheap plastic sleeve. He barely glanced at it before letting out a soft, amused exhale. This won't hold in court for 10 seconds. It's not even his handwriting, I murmured. Not really. Elijah nodded, already opening his briefcase. I brought copies of the notarized documents and the video recording from our last meeting with Henry. Do you still have the deed on hand? I handed it to him. He examined the raised seal and notarization, nodding in satisfaction. Good. Everything is in order. If they try to push this, we'll dismantle it piece by piece. As if summoned by prophecy, a knock sounded at the door. Stay seated, Elijah said, standing smoothly. Let me take the lead. I watched from the hallway as Elijah opened the door and faced them, Estelle in her stiff pearl-buttoned coat, Wayne with his arms crossed, and Tasha gripping her purse like it contained a weapon. Mr. Ford, Estelle said with a tight smile, we weren't expecting to see you here. Then I suppose your expectations are part of the problem, Elijah replied coolly. Wayne pushed forward. We have a will. No, Elijah cut in. What you have is a piece of paper, written in pencil, with no witnesses, no date, and no legal standing. What we have is a notarized will, signed and recorded, with a clear declaration of Henry Daniels' wishes. Any court in Oregon will side with us. Tasha scoffed. You lawyers think you can just intimidate people. I don't need to intimidate you, Mrs. Laramie. The law already has. He reached into his briefcase and handed them each a crisp copy of Henry's notarized will. This was signed 2 weeks before Mr. Daniels' passing. It names Grace Daniels as the sole heir of his estate. Everything you are standing on, everything in it, belongs to her. That includes the house, the assets, the furnishings, and any property not otherwise designated. Your document, he gestured at Wayne's pathetic copy, will be contested and thrown out with ease. But I'm not here just to warn you. I'm here to offer you an out. Leave now and Grace won't pursue legal damages. Push this further and we will sue for emotional distress, fraud, and property interference. You'll lose. And you'll owe her. There was a beat of silence. Estelle's face was blank, blank the way it gets when someone is calculating. She wasn't shocked. She was rearranging the pieces in her mind, trying to find another move. Wayne, on the other hand, looked like he'd been slapped. Tasha's mouth hung open like a door someone forgot to shut. "This isn't over," Estelle muttered. "Oh, I'm certain it is," Elijah said, voice steely. "You just haven't caught up to it yet." They turned, retreating down the porch with less confidence than they'd arrived. I watched them go from the hallway, and when the door clicked shut again, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Elijah returned to the table and sat, calmly sipping the coffee I'd poured earlier. "They'll stew on it," he said. "Probably try to threaten you once more before backing off. But it's done. Legally, you're untouchable." I nodded, my throat tight. Henry would have been proud of this. Elijah softened slightly. He was. "The last time I met with him," he said, "make sure she never has to fight alone." I swallowed hard, tears blurring the edges of my vision. "Thank you, Elijah." He shook his head. "Thank Henry. He thought of everything." After he left, I sat in the living room beside Henry's photo and whispered, "We're doing it, love. Just like you planned." And somehow I knew he was still right here, guiding every move. It was one thing to know in your bones that someone is capable of cruelty. It's another to see the proof with your own eyes. I sat on the worn love seat in the living room, heart pounding as Elijah inserted the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered, then filled with the static blue hue of a hospital surveillance feed. The date stamp in the corner showed it clearly, 6 days before Henry died. Elijah didn't speak as he queued up the clip. He just sat beside me, arms folded, expression unreadable. I, on the other hand, felt every emotion simmering beneath my skin: anger, grief, disbelief, and something else too: vindication. The video started, grainy but clear enough. It showed Henry in his hospital bed, thinner than ever, his shoulders hunched as he scribbled something on a piece of paper. I recognized the flannel blanket around his legs. It had been mine, brought from home to keep him warm. Then they entered. Estelle, Wayne, and Tasha, their faces already hard with expectation. Henry didn't even look up at first. He just kept writing, his hand shaking. "Henry," Estelle said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." He glanced up, clearly exhausted. "What now?" "We brought a draft," Wayne said, holding out a page. "You need to sign it." "I already took care of my will," Henry replied, and even in his weakened state, I heard the strength in his tone. Estelle crossed her arms. "You didn't think to include your family?" "I left everything to Grace," he said simply. "That woman doesn't deserve it," Tasha snapped. "She's manipulated you for years." I felt my nails dig into the armrest. Elijah reached over and gently placed his hand on mine, grounding me. "You need to sign this, Henry," Estelle said. "Before it's too late." "No," he said, voice stronger now. "You're not doing this here." "Not now." Wayne stepped closer. "You owe us, Henry." "You really want to leave everything to her? What about your legacy? Your name?" Henry leaned back against the pillows, eyes narrowed. "My legacy is 30 years with a woman who never gave up on me. That's more than I can say for the three of you." There was a pause. Then Estelle said, voice low and sharp, "Fine. But if you don't sign, don't expect peace. We'll make sure she pays for this, one way or another." Henry didn't answer. He just turned his face away and closed his eyes. The footage ended. I sat there, trembling, every muscle tight with the effort not to scream. Elijah reached forward and paused the screen on Estelle's final words, her face twisted into something cold and calculating. "They threatened him," I said quietly. "They did," Elijah confirmed. "And this footage makes it undeniable. It shows coercion, verbal threats, and an attempt to manipulate a terminally ill man into altering his will." I leaned forward, pressing my hands together like a prayer. "Can we use this?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Not only does it invalidate their handwritten will, if they even try to use it again, but it opens the door for a lawsuit. Emotional damages. Fraud. Possibly even elder abuse, if we want to pursue it. With this footage, we're no longer just defending. We're going on the offensive. A strange calm settled over me. For weeks, I had been carrying the burden of Henry's death, fending off his family's assault on everything we built. But now I had more than just memories and documents. I had the truth. Caught on camera. Irrefutable. They tried to paint me as the outsider, I murmured. But they were the ones pushing a dying man in his hospital bed to give them what they didn't earn. Elijah nodded. Henry knew they'd try something. That's why he wanted you to have everything airtight. But this footage? It's a gift. A final defense. I looked up at Henry's photo on the mantel. His smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, it brought tears to mine. You knew, I whispered. You knew this would happen. Elijah stood. We'll move forward immediately. I'll prepare the filing. We'll go for damages. And when this is over, they'll regret ever walking through your front door. After he left, I sat alone in the house, the weight of everything washing over me in slow, steady waves. I walked into the bedroom, sat on the edge of our bed, and stared at the indent in his pillow that I still couldn't bring myself to smooth out. I saw what they did, I said aloud, voice trembling. I saw how you held your ground, even at the end. You protected me, Henry. Now it's my turn to protect you. The evening light spilled across the floor like liquid gold. I closed my eyes, resting my palm on his side of the bed. I'll fight. And I'll win. For both of us. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal. I'd never been the kind of woman to set foot in a courtroom unless I was called for jury duty, and, even then, I'd sit quietly in the back, hoping I wouldn't be picked. But that day, with Elijah beside me and Henry's memory pulsing like a steady drum in my chest, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. We sat in the front row while the judge reviewed the case. The courtroom wasn't grand, just a small beige room with scuffed floors and humming lights, but it held the weight of something sacred. Truth. Justice. I could feel Henry's hand in mine, even though it was only memory. Across the aisle, Estelle sat stiff-backed in a pearl gray suit that did nothing to soften the bitterness on her face. Wayne avoided my gaze, tapping his foot nervously, while Tasha whispered furiously into their lawyer's ear. He looked unimpressed. Disheveled. Like they had hired someone last minute who didn't know what kind of mess he'd stepped into. Elijah stood and presented everything in measured, confident strokes. He handed over the notarized will, the deed, the video of Henry's hospital room, and the court sat in silence as the footage played. Gasps filled the room when Estelle's voice cracked through the speakers, cold, coercive, unmistakably threatening. Henry's words echoed once more. My legacy is 30 years with a woman who never gave up on me. I held my breath, watching the moment unfold again, even as I lived it differently now. This time, the truth was on full display. When the footage ended, the judge turned to Estelle's attorney. Do you have a rebuttal? The man stood slowly. Your Honor, while my clients may have overstepped in their grief. Overstepped? The judge interrupted, voice firm. I see evidence here not of grief, but of manipulation. This court does not take kindly to attempts to override a legal will, especially when that effort involves threatening a terminally ill man. I felt my spine straighten, my breath deepen. Elijah placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. It wasn't just reassurance, it was confirmation. We had them. The verdict came swiftly. The judge upheld the validity of Henry's will, declared the handwritten version void, and issued a formal warning to the defendants about future interference. Then, in a quiet, clear voice, he turned to me. Mrs. Daniels, the court recognizes the emotional trauma caused by the defendant's actions. You are hereby awarded $30,000 in damages. It was quiet for a moment. I didn't cheer. I didn't gasp. I simply exhaled. A breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the day they first showed up on my porch. Estelle's face drained of color. Wayne dropped his head. Tasha sputtered something inaudible, but the judge had already moved on. It was over. And we had won. Outside, the sun was bright and hot on the courthouse steps. Elijah walked with me to the edge of the parking lot, his briefcase swinging at his side. You did it, he said. We did, I corrected him. Henry did. You. Me. All of us. He nodded. They'll pay that debt for years. And their reputation won't recover from this. Word will spread. It always does. Good. Let it. Let the neighborhood whisper. Let their friends question their decency. Let the sting of what they tried to steal from us follow them through every grocery store aisle, every school pickup, every holiday gathering. I drove home in silence, windows rolled down, hair whipping in the wind. The check would arrive within the week, Elijah said. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the principle. About honoring the promises we made when Henry's body was still strong enough to hold mine in the middle of the night. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my house, our house, with new eyes. It looked sturdier somehow, more anchored to the earth. Like it had withstood the storm and come out stronger for it. I stepped onto the porch and unlocked the door, heart finally light. I set my keys in the bowl and walked straight to the living room. Henry's photo waited on the mantel. I picked it up and carried it with me to the kitchen, placing it next to the sink while I washed a few dishes left from breakfast. I spoke to him like always. Well, love, I said softly, rinsing the last plate, they'll be living in a rental now. 3 bedrooms. No view. Not enough closet space. I could almost hear his chuckle. They'll be paying this off for years. And you should have seen their faces. You would have been proud. I dried my hands and picked up the frame, cradling it in both palms. I kept my promise. Every word of it. And for the first time since I lost him, the quiet in the house felt like peace, not absence. Not loneliness. Just peace. The house feels different now. Not quieter, just more still. Like it's finally breathing with me instead of bracing against grief. Every morning, I rise before the sun, not out of habit or dread, but because it's when the world is softest. When the silence carries memory rather than pain. I pad into the kitchen, barefoot, and put the kettle on like I did when Henry was here, though now there's only 1 cup to pour. Still, I make 2. I always make 2. His photo sits on the windowsill above the sink, where the morning light hits just right. I talk to him as I move through the kitchen, narrating the little details of my day, the plans I have, the dreams I'm daring to consider again. It's not crazy, not to me. It's a promise fulfilled. Henry, I say today, as the steam rises from our cups, you wouldn't believe how the daffodils are coming in. They're all over the yard. I think that patch you planted by the fence finally took root. I imagine his grin, the one he used to wear when his hands were in the dirt and the world didn't ask anything of him but time. After breakfast, I walk through the house, each room holding its own piece of him. His sketchbooks still live in the office, and I've left them untouched, not out of grief, but reverence. They're full of the homes he designed in his head, little havens with wraparound porches and sunlit nooks. Sometimes I flip through the pages and whisper, maybe I'll build one someday. I've started writing again, too. It began as a journal, a way to speak to him, to organize the tangle of thoughts that filled the space he left. But now, it's become something else. A record, maybe. A way to remember the whole of it. Not just the fight for our home, but the laughter, the nights on the porch with a glass of wine and no words, the way we danced in the kitchen to music only we could hear. Friends visit often now. I used to keep my distance when he passed, unsure of what version of myself I'd become without him. But they stayed. They showed up with casseroles and wine, with stories and old photos, and they stayed. My world didn't shrink after Henry, it expanded in unexpected ways. Mr. Han from the restaurant called last week, said there's a position waiting if I want it. I told him maybe. I wasn't ready to be back in the kitchen. Not yet. But I didn't close the door. He understood. Some fires take time to relight, he said. He always had a way with words. And Estelle's family? I hear things. Small town talk. Their big house was sold off, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but boxes and borrowed space. They live in a modest rental now, tucked behind a row of dry shrubs on the edge of town. People cross the street to avoid conversation. The grocery clerks no longer make small talk. Wayne took a job stocking shelves. Tasha teaches piano from their living room. The money they owe will follow them for years, like shadows they can't shake. I don't gloat. I don't celebrate. But I also don't forget. Because what they did wasn't just an insult, it was theft attempted with smiles and sharpened knives. And Henry made sure they didn't get away with it. The money from the lawsuit is tucked away, untouched. Maybe I'll travel one day. Italy, maybe. Or Japan. He always wanted to see Kyoto in the spring, cherry blossoms falling like confetti. Maybe I'll go and bring a photo of him in my bag, sip green tea under pink trees, and tell him all about it. Some nights, I sit out on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and the sound of crickets in the grass. The wind moves through the trees just like it did in Astoria, that last cottage by the sea. I close my eyes and imagine his hand in mine, his voice low beside me. I still talk to you, I whisper. Every day. And I do. I tell him about my dreams, my fears, the silly things I forget at the store. I ask him where I left the keys. I laugh when the light flickers in the hallway like it always did when he used to fiddle with the wiring and say he'd fix it eventually. This home isn't a mausoleum. It's a living memory. A testament. Every brick, every creaking floorboard, every shelf he built with his own hands, it breathes with his presence. And I breathe easier now. Freer. Because grief, I've learned, isn't the enemy of peace. It's just the companion to love. And love doesn't end. It lingers. It guides. It becomes the quiet voice in the morning when you're pouring 2 cups of tea, even if only one is ever sipped. Henry may be gone. But I'm still talking. And he's still here.